Devil's Arithmetic, Chapter 8. The forest was now boiling with people, for the Viosk villagers had come behind the klezmer to greet Shmuel and his friends. Hannah hung back. More people meant more greetings and more excuses. It was worse than any family party at home. At home. The skin on her face suddenly felt stretched tight across her cheekbones, and her eyes began to prickle with tears. Where was her home? She forced herself to recall the house in New Rochelle, with its borders of flowers and the flagstone walk. But the image seemed to be fading, especially when compared with the forest full of villagers and the tiny house and the horse barn she'd just left hours before. A hand on her arm riveted her to the moment. "Come, Chaya," Giddle said. "Come and meet your new aunt-to-be." Pulling Hannah past the noisy celebrants, Giddle led her to one of the wagon facing the rest, where the men were busy at work, encouraging the two strong work horses to turn around. On that wagon sat two people. One older man, dressed all in black, with a white prayer shawl across his shoulders, a book in his lap. The other one was one of the most beautiful women Hannah had ever seen, like a movie star. She was in all white, with an elegantly beaded headdress capping her hair. That hair was jet black, so black that it didn't even have lighter highlights, and electric with curls spilling over her shoulders. There were gold rings on her fingers and gold dangling from her ears. She had a strong nose and a fierce, piercing look, like a bird of prey. "Faye," Giddle said, "this is my niece, Chaya." Hannah wondered how, with all the noise and excitement, Faye even heard Giddle's introduction, but she looked down from the wagon, those eagle eyes staring. Then she smiled, not fiercely, but even shyly. "The Lublaner! Come, you must be exhausted, walking all this way, after having been so sick. Shmuel would never forgive me if I did not let you ride. And what a pretty dress! You put us all to shame." She leaned down and offered her hand. I will not say I told you so," Giddle whispered into Hannah's ear, "but I did." As if in a dream, Hannah reached up for Faye's hand. She expected a princess's hand, small, fine-boned, and soft, but Faye's hand was large and strong, with calluses in the palm. When she was up by Faye's side, she could smell the scent on her hair and dress, like roses and wood shavings after a long rain. "Now," Faye said, turning toward her and smiling broadly, "tell me all about Lublin." The bride's wagon was turned around at last, and the procession started up again. This time the klezmer was behind, far back at the end of the line of villagers. Hannah's new friends danced by the wagon's side, hands joining, singing, "Who asked you to get married? Who asked you to be buried alive? You know that no one forced you. You took this madness on yourself." "I always hated the Shirelle," Faye said. "Such a gloomy song for such a glorious an event." "What's the Shirelle?" Hannah asked. "The wedding dance your friends are doing. You do not play such games in Lublin. Perhaps you are smarter than we." Hannah looked down at the girls. Some younger girls had joined them, and the line was twisting and turning to the rhythm of the song. "New Rochelle," she murmured, though this time it was more of a prayer than a statement. Faye didn't seem to hear. "Oh, Chaya, never mind the Shirelle. We will sing and dance other things all night long. The grandmothers will dance the Bolbitants. Well, Shmuel's grandmother is gone. May she rest in peace. But Giddle can dance with my grandmother. You should see my grandmother, so light and quick. And you too, Chaya, you will dance. Oh, only if you are feeling well enough. We will have great fun, you will see." She patted Hannah's hand. The wagon bumped along the road, swaying from side to side. Hannah wished she could get down and looked longingly at the ground. "What is it, Chayale?" they asked. "Is it much longer?" "Around one more big bend, and we will be there at my village, at Viosk. Would you believe it? My village, but for just a few more hours, and then my village no more. And would you guess that as excited as I am about marrying my beloved Shmuel, a part of me is also afraid?" Hannah laughed out loud. "Shmuel said the same thing this morning." "Did he? Did he?" Faye's eyes lit up, and suddenly she looked very young, not that much older than Hannah. "Tell me exactly what he said." Hannah closed her eyes, trying to remember. He said, yes, He said he wasn't afraid of being married, only of getting married. Reb Borak cleared his throat loudly. Oh, Chaya, Faye said, ignoring her father. Thank you for telling me that. She gave Hannah a big hug. We are going to be such good friends, you and I, best friends. Life will be good to us forever and ever, I know. The wagon made a wide turn around the bend in the path, the horses straining mightily. One blew out his nostrils, a loud huffing. Ahead, where the path widened out, was a meadow, and beyond it, a town. Hannah called over her shoulder to the dancing girls. We're here! The words sprang easily to her mouth. The girls dropped hands and stared down the path. When Hannah looked up again, she could see Viosk laid out at the far end of the meadow, picture postcard pretty. Small houses nestled in a line, and the larger buildings, none higher than 3 stories, stood behind, like mothers with their children. As the horses pulled them closer, Hannah could distinguish a central open market with stalls surrounded by stores. There was a pharmacy topped by a large black sign, a barber shop with its familiar peppermint stick, a glass-fronted tavern, and a dozen other shops. In the middle of the market, a tall wooden pole supported a bell. Behind the open market was a towering wooden building with 4 separated roofed sections and fenced courtyards. The dominant color was brown. Brown wooden buildings, brown sandy streets, as if it were a faded photograph. Yet it was real. Papa, Faye said, turning to him, what are those automobiles and trucks doing in front of the shoal? She pointed to one of the big buildings. Is it another surprise for the wedding? Oh, Papa! She gave him a big hug, and his normally dour face lit up. Hannah looked where Faye was pointing. In the middle of the brown landscape, like a dark stain, were 3 black old-fashioned cars and 12 army trucks strung out behind. She gave an involuntary shudder. They reminded her of something. She couldn't think what. Faye's father cleared his throat and closed the book on his lap. I do not make surprises, he said gruffly. Only my children make surprises. Then what are those automobiles and trucks doing in front of our shoal? Faye asked. The wagon continued its slow, side-to-side pace toward the town. Behind it, the villagers grew silent, as one by one they noticed what sat in front of the synagogue. Shmuel hurried forward, putting his hand on the wagon, close to Faye's hand, but not quite touching it. He addressed her father formally. Reb Borak, excuse me, Shmuel said, but do you know just what it is that lies ahead? I am not a fortune teller, nor yet a bad chan, Reb Borak said. It is to God you must address such questions. Just then the door of the first car opened, and a man in black uniform with high black boots stepped out. He turned and opened the car's back door. Another man, similarly dressed, unfolded himself from the seat. The metals on his chest caught the light from the spring sun, sending undecipherable signals across the market to them. Somehow the bad chan materialized in front of the wagon. He pointed to the man with the medals and cried out, I see the Malach HaMavis. I see the angel of death. Hannah felt the breath catch in her throat. Malach HaMavis. That was her grandfather's phrase, the one he shouted at her when she drew the long number on her arm. Angel of death. Slowly, carefully, she turned to Shmuel, afraid to move too quickly, afraid she might not be quick enough. Shmuel, please, what year is it? Please. He laughed, but there was little brightness in it. They do not have the same year in Lublin? Please. Faye put her hand out on Hannah's. Silly child, she said, her voice curiously hushed. It is 5701. 5701? But this can't be the future, Hannah said. It doesn't look like the future. You don't have movies or new cars or... Her voice was hoarse. She has been this way ever since she arrived, Faye, Shmuel said, shaking his head. Sometimes she is lucid. Other times she talks of rochelles and needles and snakes. He typed his finger to his forehead. It is the sickness, I think, and the loss of her parents. Now she talks of the future. Reb Borak cleared his throat. I think the child means Leuten Christlichen Lach, according to the Christian calendar. They do not know from Jewish calendar in Lublin, Faye asked. 1942. It is several days before Passover, the bad chan said. Before Passover? Hannah drew in a deep breath. And then all of a sudden she knew. She knew beyond any doubt where she was. She was not Hannah Stern of New Rochelle, at least not anymore. Though she still had Hannah's memories, those memories at least might serve as a warning. The men down there, she cried out desperately. They're not wedding guests. They're Nazis. Nazis. Do you understand? They kill people. They kill Jews, hundreds of them, thousands of them, 6 million of them. I know. Don't ask me how I know. I just do. We have to turn the wagons around. We have to run. Reb Borak shook his head. There are not 6 million Jews in all of Poland, my child. No, Rabbi. 6 million in Poland and Germany and Holland and France and... My child, such a number. He shook his head and smiled, but the corners of his mouth turned down instead of up. And as for running, where would we run to? God is everywhere. There will always be Nazis among us. No, my child, do not tremble before mere men. It is God before whom we must tremble, only God. We will go ahead, just as we have planned. After all, this is our shuttle, not theirs, and there is still a wedding to be made. He lifted his hand. On his signal, the wagon started up again across the last few yards to the market. As they moved closer, more men in dark uniforms got out of the cars and the truck cabs. They made a perfect half circle in front of the synagogue doors, like a steel trap with gaping jaws ready to be sprung. Chapter 9. The villagers gathered uneasily within the half circle of soldiers and waited to be led into the shoal. There was hardly any talking, but Yitzhak's young son, Reuben, began to whimper. To quiet him, Yitzhak lifted the boy onto his shoulders. Rabbi Borak, Shmuel, and another man Hannah did not know conferred hastily with the Nazi chief, the one with all the medals. They spoke in swift, hurried bursts of words that Hannah could not distinguish, but she could see Shmuel's fists clenching and unclenching behind his back. There were a violent punctuation to all those indistinguishable sentences, as if Shmuel wanted to shake his fist in the Nazi's face, but didn't dare. At last the argument was done, and Shmuel came over to them. He spoke gently. They insist we go with them in those trucks. No, Hannah protested in a whimper. Their argument is persuasive, Shmuel answered. His thumb and forefinger pointed at her like a gun. They say all Jews are being resettled. It is government policy. I heard that too, Yitzhak added. Government policy. They have been settling villages closer to the big cities. I thought out here they would leave us alone. Another man argued. What does a Goyish government have to do with us? A kick in the face and a hand in the pocket, said another. Wait, Shmuel said. His voice was soft, but his face was grim. Remember those guns? Faye moved silently into the protection of his arms. What about our wedding? She meant it for his ears alone, but Hannah was close enough for him to hear every plaintive symbol. We will be married, Faye. Your father will marry us. Maybe not here in your shoal. Maybe not even under a wedding canopy. Not under a canopy? Faye was shocked. We will be married in God's sight, Shmuel said adamantly. I promise you that nothing will keep us apart. The Nazis will, Hannah said suddenly. She could feel the rapid thudding of her heart as she spoke. They'll take you from here and put you in a concentration camp, and they'll put you in gas ovens and kill you. She could hear her voice rise in pitch, its intensity frightening her. Chaya, Gittel said sharply, putting her fingers up to Hannah's lips and whispering hoarsely at her. Hush, the soldiers will hear. Turning in Shmuel's arms, Faye stared at Hannah, her beautiful face sharp, her eyes nearly all pupil. How can you talk like that? Your words will fly up to heaven and call down the angel of death, Lilith's bridegroom, with his poisoned sword. Gittel shook her finger at Faye. Nonsense, you talk like one of the old women in the village. Angels and poisoned swords. Why not flying chariots and the finger of the Lord? Chaya does no such thing. How could she? She is only a child, as you are no longer. She is a child with too much imagination and stories filling her head. She has just been recalled by a miracle from the doors of death. Shame, Faye, to make her into some kind of monster. Rachel interrupted. Tante Gittel, I think I know what Chaya is talking about. She told us a story this morning about two children named... She thought about it a moment. Yes, Hansel and Gretel. Oh, Gittel. Gretel, Hannah corrected automatically. Yes, Gretel, Rachel said, and there's a witch who shoves little boys into ovens and eats them. She shuddered and drew a deep breath. A fairy tale. The gas ovens I mean are not a fairy tale, Hannah said. Giddle raised her chin, squinting her eyes, and, ignoring Hannah, addressed Fay directly. See, my almost sister-in-law, the child was just reciting a story, and surely we have more important things to worry about than tall tales. Her hands went up, and then back down to her skirt, where she wiped them twice. And what could be more important than such a curse? Fay added, adding slowly, my sister Giddle. Giddle smiled. Are your mother and grandmother not important? Where are they? Why have they not come out to greet us? Fay looked around. Giddle, you are right. Where are they? Where is Tante Sarah and Tante Deborah? And her voice trailed off as she looked back at Shmuel. And the rest, where are they? Her hand twisted and twisted one of the gold earbob nervously. Stone-faced, Shmuel wouldn't look down to meet her eyes. In a flat voice he said, the colonel informed us that they have been sent for resettlement already. We will meet them there. You can't believe that, Hannah cried. What else can we believe? Shmuel said. Gas ovens, Lilith bridegroom, poisoned swords, the angel of death. Just then Red Borak cleared his throat loudly, and all the little knots of people who had been talking fell silent. My friends, my neighbors, my children, he began. It seems we have no choice in the matter. The government has decreed that we are to be relocated for the duration of this war in which we Jews take no part. So it is with governments. There was a murmur of assent from the men. My wife, my mother, my sisters, and all of yours, those who were willing to wait here in Viosk for our return from the forest, those who were getting ready for the wedding, they have been sent ahead. They have taken with them what clothing, household goods we shall need in the resettlement camp. But what of our clothes and our goods? Called out Yitzhak. Those of us who are not from Viosk. We will share what we have, said the rabbi, for we are not all neighbors and friends. Are we not all brothers and sisters in God's eye? Are we not? All will be taken care of, the Nazi colonel interrupted smoothly. You will want for nothing. We want for nothing except to be left alone here in Viosk, said a voice. Nevertheless, the colonel continued, smiling, in this matter we will make the ruling. When you get to your new homes, anyone who wants to work will be treated humanely. The tailor will sew, the shoemaker will have his last, and you will be happy among your own people, just as we will be happy you have followed the government's orders. The snake smiles but shows no teeth, murmured the bad Chan. Hannah wondered if anyone else had heard him. Raising his hands, the rabbi began to speak. The colonel has assured me that some of his soldiers will remain billeted here to guard our stores and houses and schools from harm while we are gone. At my request, the soldiers will pay special attention to the shoal to make sure the peasants do not desecrate it. Better the fox to guard the hens and the wolves to guard the sheep, the bad Chan said. This time he was heard, and there were murmurs in the crowd. One man called out, but Red Borak, why would they billet soldiers here if they are needed elsewhere for the war? Am I a general to answer such questions? The rabbi asked. Am I the head of state? I only know that they have promised me this, so this I believe. They say the war is almost over, and we will not be gone from Viosk for long. How long is eternity? The bad Chan muttered. Hannah tried to speak again, but this time Giddle's hand covered her entire mouth. Be still, child, Giddle whispered. Whatever your objections, be still. This is not one of your stories that ends happily ever after. There are not imaginary bullets in those guns. Listen to the rabbi. He is right to calm us. If we go quietly, no harm will come. Suddenly remembering the pictures on television, the ones that made her grandfather so crazy, Hannah shook her head, but she shook it silently as Giddle commanded. She wanted to cry, and she knew she'd feel better if she could, but no tears came. Drawing a deep breath, she heard the rabbi begin to pray aloud. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohinu, Adonai echoed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord of our God, the Lord is one. The others joined in, even Hannah. They climbed into the trucks in family groups, reluctant to be parted. Since Shmuel would not let go of Faye's hand despite the rabbi's fierce stare, the rabbi was forced to climb in the truck with them, standing next to Hannah. Yitzhak handed his children up to Gittel one at a time, and she kept her arms tight around the little boy Tipsora. There were finally so many villagers packed into each truck there was no room to sit down. So they stood, the children up on the men's shoulders. They looked like holidayers off on a trip, but they felt to Hannah all crushed together, like cattle going to slaughtered for the market. The trucks barreled down the long winding road, their passengers silenced by the dust deviling up by the heat. After a bit, to keep the children in the truck from crying, Gittel began to sing. First, she tried a lullaby called Yankel to quiet them, then several children's songs, but as the truck continued without a stop, carrying them further and farther away from Viosk, onto roads most of them had never seen, she broke into a song that, for all its wailing minor notes and the la 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 chorus, sounded angry. Hannah tried to make out the words above the noise of the truck. They were about someone called a chapper or snatcher or kidnapper who dragged men off into the army. One verse went, "Sir, give me a piece of bread. Look at me, so pale and dead." It hardly seemed a song to calm the children, but first Shmuel, then Yitzhak, then several of the other men in the truck joined in, singing at the top of their voices. The children on their perches clapped in rhythm. At last, Faye and her father began to sing. Hannah listened to the growing chorus and wondered, as the song leaped from truck to truck down the long road, didn't they know? Didn't they guess? Didn't they care? She kept remembering more and more bits and pieces of her classroom discussion about the Holocaust, about the death camps and the crematoria, about the brutal Nazis and the 6 million dead Jews. Was knowing or not knowing more frightening? She couldn't decide. A strange, awful taste rose in her mouth, more bitter than even the cedar's bitter herbs. And they were for remembering. She fought the taste down. She would not, she could not be sick. Not here, not now. She opened her mouth to catch a breath of air and found herself singing. The sound of her own voice drowned out the steady drone of the tires on the endless, twisting road.